I should have known something was wrong when Jovie started keeping her phone face down during dinner. My wife of 7 years had never been shy about her device before. She'd answer texts mid-conversation, scroll through social media while I talked about work, and leave the thing buzzing on every surface in our house. But for the past 3 weeks, that iPhone had been glued to her palm like a state secret. "Mason, are you even listening?" Jovie's voice cut through my thoughts as I pushed meatloaf around my plate. She was wearing that expression again, the one that said I was disappointing her just by existing. "Sorry, long day at the office. Had to inspect that new subdivision on Maple Street. I work as a building inspector for the city of Millbrook, Maine. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and gives me access to more places than most people realize." "What were you saying?" "I was talking about the baby shower for my cousin Rachel. It's next weekend and I need you to—" Her phone buzzed against the table. Jovie's hand shot out so fast she nearly knocked over her water glass, flipping the device over and clutching it to her chest. "Important client?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. "Just work stuff." She was already standing, phone pressed against her ear as she headed toward the kitchen. "I need to take this." I sat there for a moment, listening to her muffled voice from the next room. Something in her tone was different, softer, more intimate than any conversation she'd ever had with a real estate client. I'd been married to Jovie long enough to know the difference between her professional voice and her personal one. 20 minutes later, she returned to find me loading the dishwasher. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine, just a difficult buyer." She wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'm going to take a bath." That night, I lay in bed listening to Jovie's breathing, waiting for it to settle into the deep rhythm of sleep. When I was sure she was out, I carefully slid from under the covers and padded to the kitchen where she'd left her phone charging. I'd never snooped through my wife's phone before. In 7 years of marriage, the thought had never even crossed my mind. But as I stood there in my boxers and a t-shirt, staring at that glowing screen, every instinct I had was screaming that something was very wrong. Her passcode was still our anniversary date. Some habits die hard, I guess. The text messages were right there at the top, a conversation thread with someone named Rowan K that went back months. I scrolled to the most recent exchange, and my world tilted sideways. Rowan K. "When are you going to tell him?" Jovie. "Soon, after the paternity test results come back." Rowan K. "You sure he'll go for it?" Jovie. "He still thinks the baby is his. Pathetic." I read those 4 words 3 times before they sank in. The baby is his. The baby that Jovie was supposedly carrying. The baby we'd been trying for over 2 years to conceive. The baby that had finally happened 6 weeks ago. According to the pregnancy test she'd shown me with tears of joy in her eyes. My hands were shaking as I scrolled up through their conversation history. The messages painted a picture that made my stomach turn. Meetings at the auto shop where Rowan worked. Afternoon encounters when I was at job sites. Discussions about how to handle the Mason situation once everything came out. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how calculated it all was. They'd been planning this for months. Jovie had been coming home to me every night, kissing me hello, asking about my day, all while carrying another man's child and plotting how to make me raise it as my own. I took screenshots of everything and emailed them to my personal account. Then I carefully placed the phone back on its charger and returned to bed, where I lay staring at the ceiling until dawn. The next morning, Jovie was her usual self, rushing around the kitchen in her real estate blazer, complaining about traffic and difficult clients. She kissed my cheek goodbye like she had every morning for 7 years. "Have a good day, honey," she said, grabbing her purse and keys. "You too." I watched her drive away in her Honda Civic, probably heading to meet Rowan before her first showing of the day. I called in sick to work and spent the morning doing research. Rowan Carrick owned Carrick Auto Repair on the south side of town. 38 years old, divorced, no kids. His shop had decent reviews online, and his Facebook page was full of pictures of classic cars and fishing trips. He looked exactly like the kind of guy Jovie would find exciting. Tall, broad shoulders, the type who worked with his hands and probably had grease permanently embedded under his fingernails. Everything I wasn't. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. By noon, I had a plan forming. Not the kind of plan that would land me in jail or make me into some kind of monster. I'm not that type of guy. But I wasn't going to just roll over and let them destroy my life without consequences either. I called my cousin Cleo first. She worked as a nurse at Millbrook General and had always been the family's unofficial source of information and advice. Mason, shouldn't you be at work? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. I took a deep breath. Have you heard any rumors about Jovie? The pause on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. What kind of rumors? Cleo's voice was careful, measured. The kind that would explain why she's suddenly pregnant after 2 years of trying, and why she's been acting strange lately. Another pause. Then, Mason, maybe you should come over. We should talk about this in person. An hour later, I was sitting in Cleo's kitchen while she made coffee and avoided eye contact. I didn't want to be the one to tell you, she finally said, settling into the chair across from me. But there's been talk around town about Jovie and that mechanic Rowan Carrick. How long? Months, maybe since last winter. Cleo's face was full of sympathy. I'm sorry, Mason. I kept hoping it was just gossip. It's not. I showed her the screenshots on my phone. She's pregnant, and it's his. Cleo read through the messages, her expression growing darker with each one. That conniving little... She caught herself. I'm sorry. I know she's your wife. Not for much longer. I took the phone back. I need to ask you something else. If I wanted to request a paternity test, how would I go about it? Well, you can't force her to take one while she's pregnant, not without a court order. But after the baby's born, any man named on the birth certificate can request testing. Cleo leaned forward. Mason, are you sure about this? Once you go down this road, there's no going back. I thought about Jovie's face that morning, the casual way she'd kissed me goodbye while carrying another man's child. The months of lies and careful planning, the word pathetic echoing in my head. I'm sure. That evening, Jovie came home late, claiming she'd had to show a house to out-of-town buyers. She was in a good mood, humming while she heated up leftover Chinese food. How was your day? She asked, like she actually cared. Interesting. I watched her face carefully. I've been thinking about the baby. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. Oh? I think we should get a paternity test. The fork clattered against her plate. What? Mason, that's... Why would you even say something like that? Just to be sure. Make sure everything's healthy and normal. I kept my voice level, reasonable. It's pretty standard these days. Jovie's face had gone pale. I can't believe you'd even suggest that. Do you not trust me? Should I? The question hung in the air between us. Jovie stared at me, and for a moment, I thought she might confess everything. Instead, her expression hardened. I don't owe you anything, Mason. You should be grateful I even married you, let alone agreed to have your children. There it was. The real Jovie, the one who'd been hiding behind 7 years of fake smiles and calculated affection. She only used the word grateful when she was caught in a corner and needed to make me feel small. Grateful, I repeated. Interesting choice of words. She realized her mistake immediately. I didn't mean... No, I think you meant exactly what you said. I stood up from the table. And I think that paternity test is looking more necessary by the minute. Jovie's eyes filled with tears, the same tears she'd used to manipulate me for years. How can you be so cruel? I'm carrying your child and you're treating me like some kind of criminal. My child. I nodded slowly. We'll see about that. I left her crying at the kitchen table and went upstairs to our bedroom, where I started researching divorce attorneys on my laptop. By the time Jovie came to bed, I was pretending to be asleep. But I was wide awake, planning. The Blue Hour was the kind of bar where working men went to complain about their bosses and their wives, usually in that order. It sat on the corner of Maine and Industrial, a squat brick building that had been serving Millbrook's blue-collar crowd for 30 years. The neon sign flickered between open and ope, and the parking lot was always full of pickup trucks and motorcycles. I'd been coming here since I turned 21, back when I was working construction before I got my inspector's license. The regulars knew me, and more importantly, they knew everything that happened in this town. "Mason, haven't seen you in a while." Tommy Breslin, the bartender, was already reaching for a bottle of Budweiser before I'd even sat down. "How's married life treating you?" "Can't complain." I accepted the beer and took a long pull. Actually, that's not true. I could complain plenty, but nobody wants to hear it. Tommy laughed. "Trouble in paradise?" Something like that. I glanced around the bar. It was Thursday night, which meant the usual crowd. Electricians from the paper mill, a few guys from the road crew, and Frank Morrison, who owned the hardware store and knew everyone's business. "You know anything about Rowan Carrick?" I asked casually. Tommy's expression shifted slightly. "Carrick? Yeah, I know him. Runs that auto shop down on Industrial. Why?" "Just curious. Someone mentioned him the other day." "He's all right, I guess. Keeps to himself mostly. Though..." Tommy leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I heard he's been stepping out on his girlfriend lately." This was news to me. "He has a girlfriend?" "Linda Watts. Works at the bank. They've been together maybe 2 years. Tommy shrugged. "But you know how it is. Some guys can't keep it in their pants." I filed that information away. "Any idea who he's been seeing?" "Nah, just rumors. But if I had to guess..." Tommy glanced around, then leaned even closer. "I'd say it's someone married. He's been real secretive about it." I finished my beer and ordered another, letting Tommy move on to other customers. The pieces were starting to come together. Rowan was cheating on his girlfriend with my wife, and apparently, they weren't being as careful as they thought. Around 9 o'clock, Frank Morrison wandered over to my end of the bar. Frank was in his 60s, a lifelong Millbrook resident who'd seen every scandal and secret this town had to offer. "Mason Redden, right? You're the building inspector." "That's right." "Thought so. You did the inspection on my nephew's garage last month." Frank ordered a whiskey and settled onto the stool next to mine. "Good work, by the way. Caught some problems the contractor tried to hide." "Just doing my job." "That's what I like to hear. Too many people cut corners these days." Frank sipped his whiskey thoughtfully. "Speaking of cutting corners, you know anything about that auto shop on Industrial? Carrick's place?" My pulse quickened. "Not really. Why?" "Oh, probably nothing. But I've been hearing things. Customers complaining about overcharges, work that didn't need to be done." Frank shrugged. "Makes you wonder what else he might be cutting corners on." "You think there might be code violations?" "Wouldn't surprise me. These small business owners, they think they can get away with anything if they know the right people." I bought Frank another whiskey and let him talk. By the time I left the bar, I had a pretty clear picture of Rowan Carrick's operation, and some ideas about how to make his life more complicated. The next morning, I drove by Carrick Auto Repair on my way to work. It was a typical small-town garage, 2 bays, a small office, and a lot full of cars in various states of repair. The building looked like it had been there since the 1970s, which meant there was a good chance it hadn't been updated to meet current code requirements. I made a mental note to schedule an routine inspection in the near future. At work, I pulled Rowan's business license and inspection records. The last official inspection had been 3 years ago, and it had turned up several minor violations that were supposedly corrected. But in my experience, small business owners often took shortcuts when they thought nobody was looking. I also did some digging into his personal life. Rowan lived in a rental house on Elm Street, drove a restored 1969 Mustang, and had a reputation for being charming with women and unreliable with money. His divorce 2 years earlier had been messy, according to the court records I could access. Most interesting of all, he owed back taxes to the state, nearly $15,000. That was the kind of information that could be very useful if it fell into the right hands. That afternoon, I drove past Jovie's office. Her Honda was in the parking lot, but I knew from her calendar that she didn't have any appointments until 4 o'clock. I decided to take a chance. Carrick Auto Repair was only 10 minutes away. Sure enough, Jovie's car was parked behind the building, hidden from street view. I took several photos with my phone, making sure to capture the license plate and timestamp. I was back at my office when Jovie called. "Hi, honey. How's your day going?" "Fine. Busy." I could hear background noise, voices, maybe a radio. "Where are you?" "Just finishing up with a client. We're looking at a property on the outskirts of town." The lie came so easily, I almost admired her skill. "I might be late for dinner." "No problem. I'll probably grab something at the Blue Hour anyway." "Okay. Love you." "Love you too." I hung up and stared at the photos on my phone. Two could play this game. That evening, I returned to the Blue Hour and struck up conversations with more of the regulars. Amazing how much people would tell you if you bought them a drink and asked the right questions. I learned that Rowan had been bragging about a special lady who was going to help him get his finances straightened out. I learned that he'd been seen around town with a blonde woman in a Honda Civic. I learned that Linda Watts, his official girlfriend, had been asking her friends if they thought Rowan was cheating on her. Most importantly, I learned that Rowan had a temper when he was cornered, but he was fundamentally a coward. The kind of guy who would fold under pressure if someone pushed him hard enough. By the time I went home that night, I had the beginnings of a plan. It wasn't going to be quick, and it wasn't going to be easy, but it was going to be thorough. Jovie was already in bed when I got home, supposedly asleep. I sat in my home office and started making lists: phone numbers, addresses, dates and times, bank account information, insurance policies, everything I would need to systematically dismantle the life my wife and her lover had been building on my back. I also started documenting everything: screenshots of text messages, photos of Jovie's car at the auto shop, records of her lies about where she'd been and what she'd been doing. If this ended up in divorce court, and it would, I wanted to be prepared. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal. Jovie had gotten more affectionate lately, probably feeling guilty about her deception. She would curl up next to me on the couch while we watched television, or surprise me with my favorite dinner. The pregnancy symptoms were becoming more obvious too: morning sickness, fatigue, changes in her appetite. If the baby had actually been mine, I would have been the happiest man in Maine. Instead, every day felt like swallowing broken glass. But I kept my mouth shut and played the role of the devoted husband. Because the longer Jovie thought she was getting away with her scheme, the more evidence I could gather, and the more devastating her eventual fall would be. 3 weeks after I'd first discovered the text messages, I finally made my move. I called the state inspector's office and filed a complaint about Carrick Auto Repair, citing concerns about environmental violations and safety code compliance. "We'll send someone out within the next 2 weeks, the clerk told me. "Actually, I'm a city building inspector here in Millbrook. I'd be happy to do a preliminary assessment if that would help." "That would be great. Let me get you the paperwork." 2 days later, I had official authorization to inspect Rowan Carrick's auto shop. I scheduled the visit for the following Thursday afternoon, a time when I knew Jovie would be there for one of their regular meetings. This was going to be fun. Thursday afternoon arrived gray and drizzly, typical Maine weather for late October. I pulled into the parking lot of Carrick Auto Repair at exactly 2:30, wearing my official city inspector jacket and carrying a clipboard thick with forms and regulations. Jovie's Honda was parked behind the building, just as I'd expected. The front office was small and cluttered, with automotive magazines scattered across a coffee table and the smell of motor oil permeating everything. A bell jingled when I pushed through the door, and after a moment, Rowan Carrick emerged from the back, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. He was exactly what I'd expected. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of rugged good looks that probably made women forget he was 38 and still renting a house. His dark hair was streaked with premature gray, and he had the confident swagger of a man who'd never had to work very hard to get female attention. "Help you?" he asked, giving me the practiced smile he probably used on all his customers. "Mason Redden, city building inspector." I flashed my badge and pulled out my clipboard. "I'm here to conduct a routine safety and environmental compliance check." The smile faltered slightly. "Is there a problem? I wasn't expecting any inspection." "It's just routine. We're doing spot checks on all the automotive businesses in the city." I started walking toward the service bays, forcing him to follow. "How long have you owned this place?" "About 5 years." Rowan was trying to stay casual, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "Look, if this is about the Henderson complaint, I already explained to the city that—" "Henderson complaint?" I made a note on my clipboard. I wasn't aware of any specific complaints. What was the issue? "Nothing serious, just a misunderstanding about billing." Rowan was starting to sweat despite the cool weather. Everything got sorted out. I nodded and continued my inspection, checking electrical panels, ventilation systems, and waste disposal procedures. Carrick Auto Repair wasn't the worst shop I'd ever seen, but it wasn't the best either. There were several minor violations: an overloaded electrical outlet, improper storage of hazardous materials, a fire extinguisher that was 6 months overdue for inspection. Nothing that would shut him down, but enough to make his life complicated. "I'm going to need to see your hazardous waste disposal records," I told him, pulling out my phone to take photos of the violations. "Sure, they're in the office." Rowan led me back toward the front of the building, and that's when I heard it. A woman's laugh coming from somewhere in the back, a laugh I'd been listening to for 7 years. "Is someone else here?" I asked innocently. "Just a customer. She's waiting for her car." Rowan's voice was tight. "The records are right here." He handed me a folder of paperwork, but I was already moving toward the sound of Jovie's voice. "I should probably speak with your customer as well. Part of the inspection process, making sure customers feel safe in the facility." "That's really not necessary." But I was already pushing through the door to the back office, where I found my wife sitting on a folding chair, very obviously not waiting for her car to be repaired. Jovie's face went white when she saw me. "Mason, what are you doing here?" "Official business." I held up my clipboard and smiled. "What are you doing here? I thought you had showings this afternoon." My car was making a noise. I brought it in to have it checked." Jovie was scrambling for an explanation, but we both knew how weak it sounded. "Really? Because your car's parked out back, and I didn't see it in either of the service bays." I looked back and forth between them, enjoying their obvious panic. "Must have been a quick repair?" Rowan cleared his throat. We were just discussing the estimate. Sometimes it's easier to talk in private, away from the noise of the shop." "Of course." I made another note on my clipboard. "Well, don't let me interrupt. I just need to finish my inspection." I spent another hour going through every inch of that shop, taking photos and asking questions, while Jovie sat in the back office pretending to read a magazine. Rowan followed me around like a nervous puppy, trying to explain away every violation I found. "The fire extinguisher just needs to be recharged," he said. "I've been meaning to take care of that." "And this electrical situation?" I pointed to an outlet with 3 extension cords plugged into it. "Temporary setup. I'm having an electrician come out next week." I wrote down several more violations, making sure he could see the growing list. "You know, Mr. Carrick," Running a business like this requires a lot of attention to detail. One small oversight can lead to serious problems. I understand. I hope so. Because the city takes safety very seriously. We can't have business owners cutting corners or taking shortcuts. I looked directly at him. It tends to catch up with people eventually. By the time I finished the inspection, both Jovie and Rowan looked like they'd been through a blender. I handed Rowan a copy of my report, which listed 8 separate violations that needed to be corrected within 30 days. I'll be back to verify compliance, I told him. And just so you know, we'll be conducting follow-up inspections every 6 months from now on. This neighborhood has had some complaints lately. Jovie was already heading for the door. I need to get back to the office. See you at home, honey. I gave her a kiss on the cheek, just to watch her flinch. Drive safely. I left them standing there and drove back to City Hall, where I filed my inspection report and made copies for my personal files. Then I called the State Environmental Office and reported concerns about improper disposal of automotive fluids at Carrick Auto Repair. That evening, Jovie was quiet during dinner. She picked at her food and avoided eye contact, clearly trying to figure out whether my appearance at the auto shop had been coincidental or intentional. "How did your showings go today?" I asked casually. "Fine. Good prospects." She was sticking to her story. "How was your inspection?" "Interesting. Found several violations at that auto shop. The owner seemed pretty nervous about it. Maybe he's just not used to dealing with inspectors." "Maybe." I took a bite of my meatloaf. "Or maybe he's got something to hide." Jovie's fork clattered against her plate. "Not everyone is hiding something, Mason." "No, you're right. Most people are pretty honest and straightforward." I looked directly at her. "It's just the dishonest ones that make you paranoid." That night, I lay in bed listening to Jovie toss and turn beside me. Around midnight, she got up to use the bathroom, and I heard her whispering into her phone, probably calling Rowan to discuss damage control. Let them worry. This was just the beginning. Over the next few days, I continued my research and planning. I drove by Rowan's house and noted that his prized Mustang was always parked in the driveway, perfectly maintained and probably worth more than he could afford to lose. I also confirmed that he was still dating Linda Watts, the bank employee who had no idea her boyfriend was cheating on her with a married woman. I started thinking about Linda. She deserved to know the truth about what kind of man she was dating. It would be a shame if someone anonymously sent her some photos of Rowan's afternoon meetings with my wife. I also looked into Rowan's financial situation more carefully. The back taxes were just the beginning. He had credit card debt, a loan on his shop equipment, and a mortgage on his house that he was struggling to pay. A man in that position couldn't afford to lose customers or face expensive regulatory fines. All it would take was a little pressure in the right places. On Saturday morning, I was washing my car in the driveway when our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, came over to chat. She was a retired teacher in her 70s who kept track of everything that happened on our street. "How's Jovie feeling?" she asked. "I know the first trimester can be difficult." "She's managing. Morning sickness has been pretty rough." I kept scrubbing at a spot on my hood. "We're just taking it one day at a time." "That's smart. You know, my daughter went through the same thing with her first pregnancy, the nausea, the fatigue, but once she got to the second trimester, everything improved." I nodded politely, but inside I was thinking about the paternity test that would eventually prove the baby wasn't mine. Mrs. Patterson would be one of many people who would witness Jovie's public humiliation when the truth came out. "You two must be so excited," she continued. "Oh, we are. It's going to change everything." That was certainly true, just not in the way Mrs. Patterson imagined. That afternoon, I made my next move. I drove to the Blue Hour and sought out Frank Morrison, the hardware store owner who'd mentioned rumors about Rowan's business practices. "Frank, remember when you mentioned that auto shop on Industrial, Carrick's place?" "Sure. Why?" "I did an inspection there this week. Found several violations. I ordered a beer and leaned against the bar. Made me wonder if there might be other issues I should know about. Frank's eyes lit up with interest. What kind of violations? Safety stuff mostly, but you mentioned customer complaints? Yeah, my nephew took his truck there last month. Rowan told him he needed $800 worth of work. My nephew got a second opinion. Turned out half of it was unnecessary. That's fraud. That's what I told him. But you know how it is. Proving it is another matter. I bought Frank another drink and let him talk. By the time I left, I had the names of 3 other customers who'd had similar experiences with Carrick Auto Repair. A pattern of overcharging and unnecessary repairs. The kind of pattern that would interest the Better Business Bureau and the State Attorney General's office. Monday morning, I filed complaints with both organizations, providing Frank's nephew's contact information and suggesting they investigate Carrick Auto Repair's business practices. Then I sat back and waited for the pressure to build. Jovie had been increasingly nervous over the weekend, jumping every time her phone rang and spending long periods in the bathroom with the door locked. She was probably getting updates from Rowan about the inspection fallout and trying to figure out their next move. What they didn't realize was that I was 3 steps ahead of them, and I was just getting started. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing building permits at my desk. Jovie's voice was strained, barely controlled. Mason, I need to talk to you. I'm at work. Can it wait? No, it can't wait. I'm coming to your office. She hung up before I could respond. 20 minutes later, she was sitting across from my desk, her face pale and her hands shaking slightly. I know what you're doing, she said without preamble. I'm working. Same thing I do every day. I kept my voice neutral, professional. The inspection at Rowan's shop, the complaints to the state. Don't think I'm stupid, Mason. I leaned back in my chair and studied her face. I have no idea what you're talking about. I inspect businesses all over this city. It's my job. It's not a coincidence, and we both know it. What exactly are you accusing me of, Jovie? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Because to accuse me of targeting Rowan, she'd have to admit why I would want to target him. And she wasn't ready to do that yet. I just think you should be careful, she said finally, about making enemies unnecessarily. Is that a threat? It's advice. From someone who cares about you. I almost laughed at that. How thoughtful. Is there anything else? Because I have actual work to do. Jovie stood up, smoothing down her skirt. Just remember that actions have consequences, Mason. For everyone involved. After she left, I sat at my desk thinking about her words. Actions have consequences. She was absolutely right about that. The question was whether she understood that her actions were about to have consequences too. That afternoon, I made a trip to the county courthouse and pulled the divorce records for Rowan Carrick's marriage. The file made for interesting reading. His ex-wife had accused him of financial irresponsibility, infidelity, and emotional manipulation. She'd also mentioned in her testimony that Rowan had a pattern of becoming involved with married women, apparently finding the secrecy and drama exciting. My wife was just the latest in a series. I made copies of the relevant documents and added them to my growing file. Then I drove to the bank where Linda Watts worked. Millbrook Savings and Loan was a small community bank with 3 tellers and a manager who'd been there since the Carter administration. Linda worked at the first window, a pleasant-looking woman in her early 30s with brown hair and a genuine smile. I waited in line until I reached her window, then made small talk while she processed my deposit. You're Linda Watts, right? I think you know my cousin Cleo Marver. She works at the hospital. Oh yes, Cleo's great. How do you know her? Family. I'm Mason Redden. I handed her my business card. I'm the city building inspector. Nice to meet you. Cleo's mentioned you before. Listen, this might be awkward, but I feel like I should mention something. You're dating Rowan Carrick, right? Her smile faltered slightly. Yes, why? I had to do an inspection at his shop last week, and I happened to see him with another woman. It looked intimate. I tried to sound reluctant, like I was struggling with whether to say anything. I probably shouldn't have mentioned it, but if I were in your position, I'd want to know. Linda's face went through several expressions: confusion, hurt, anger. Another woman? Are you sure? I couldn't be certain, of course, but they seemed very familiar with each other. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. No, Thank you for telling me. Can I ask what she looked like? Blonde, well-dressed, driving a Honda Civic. I paused. Look, maybe it was innocent, but you deserve to know if something's going on. I left the bank feeling slightly guilty about involving Linda, but not guilty enough to stop. She was going to find out about Rowan's cheating eventually. I was just accelerating the timeline. That evening, Jovie was unusually quiet during dinner. She kept checking her phone and seemed distracted. Everything okay? I asked. Fine, just work stress. Anything I can help with? She looked at me sharply, as if trying to determine whether the offer was genuine or sarcastic. No, it's nothing you can help with. Around 9 o'clock, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, then at me. I need to take this. It's a client. She went upstairs to our bedroom and closed the door. I could hear her voice through the floor, but not the words. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. When she came back downstairs, her eyes were red and her makeup was smudged. Bad news about a sale? I asked. Something like that. I had a pretty good idea what the phone call had been about. Rowan was probably dealing with questions from Linda, pressure from the state inspectors, and complaints from customers who were starting to come forward about his business practices. He was scared, and scared men make mistakes. The next morning, I drove by his shop on my way to work. There were 2 cars in the parking lot instead of the usual 5 or 6. A sign in the window advertised a special discount on all services, the kind of desperate promotion businesses run when they're losing customers. I also noticed that Rowan's Mustang wasn't in its usual spot. Either he was driving it to work, which seemed unlikely given the weather, or something had happened to it. I found out which one that afternoon when I stopped by the Blue Hour for lunch. Frank Morrison was already there, nursing a beer and looking pleased with himself. You hear about that auto shop owner? He asked when he saw me. Carrick? What about him? Someone vandalized his car last night, poured sugar in the gas tank, slashed the tires, scratched up the paint job. Frank shook his head. Probably cost him $5,000 in damage. Any idea who did it? My guess? One of the customers he ripped off. Word's been getting around about his business practices. People are angry. I ordered a sandwich and let Frank tell me the details. Apparently, Rowan had called the police, but there were no witnesses and no evidence pointing to any specific person. The investigating officer had suggested it might be related to his business disputes. Karma, Frank said with satisfaction. Guy like that, it was bound to catch up with him eventually. That afternoon, I got a call from the state environmental inspector who was following up on my complaint about Carrick Auto Repair. We did a surprise inspection this morning, she told me. Found several violations of hazardous waste disposal regulations. We're issuing fines totaling $12,000. $12,000? That seems steep. It's actually on the low end. If he'd been dumping oil directly into the storm drains, we could have shut him down entirely. She paused. Thanks for the tip. These small operations think they can get away with anything. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and considered the situation. Rowan was now facing state fines, customer complaints, a vandalized car, and a girlfriend who was asking uncomfortable questions about his fidelity. The pressure was building exactly as I'd planned, but I wasn't done yet. That evening, I called my cousin Cleo and asked her to meet me for coffee. We sat in a corner booth at the diner on Main Street, away from other customers. I need to ask you something, I said, and I need you to keep it between us. This is about Jovie, isn't it? How did you know? Cleo stirred her coffee thoughtfully. You've been different lately. Distant. And there are rumors. What kind of rumors? The kind that say your wife is having an affair with Rowan Carrick and that she's pregnant with his baby. I stared at her. How long have people been talking about this? Weeks? Maybe months? Cleo reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm sorry, Mason. I should have said something sooner. I already know. I found text messages on her phone. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots. The question is what I should do about it. Cleo read through the messages, her expression growing angrier with each one. That manipulative little witch. She was planning to make you raise another man's child? That was the plan, until I found out. What are you going to do? I told her about the divorce attorney I'd consulted, the evidence I'd been gathering, and my plans for a paternity test once the baby was born. But that's months away, Cleo said. You're going to live with this until then? Unless she confesses first, which she might, if the pressure gets too intense. What kind of pressure? I told her about Rowan's recent troubles, the business complaints, the state fines, the vandalized car. I didn't mention my role in any of it. Sounds like his life is falling apart, Cleo observed. Stress has a way of making people do stupid things, like tell the truth when they're cornered. Cleo studied my face. You're not just waiting for this to resolve itself, are you? You're actively making it happen. I'm just doing my job. If Rowan's business happens to have some problems as a result, that's not my fault. Mason. Cleo's voice was serious. Be careful. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but don't do anything that could come back to hurt you. I'm not planning to do anything illegal or violent. I'm just making sure the truth comes out. Sometimes the truth comes out in ways we don't expect. As I drove home that night, I thought about Cleo's warning. She was right that I was taking risks, but Jovie and Rowan had taken risks too when they decided to destroy my life. The difference was that I was better at managing consequences than they were. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. We need to talk. Tomorrow, 7 p.m., Blue Hour, come alone. ER. Rowan wanted a face-to-face meeting. That was interesting, and probably a mistake on his part. But I was curious to hear what he had to say. I arrived at the Blue Hour 15 minutes early and chose a table in the back corner where I could see the entire bar. The usual crowd was there, electricians, road crew workers, and a few retirees nursing beers and complaining about politics. Tommy was working behind the bar, and he gave me a nod when I walked in. I ordered a Budweiser and waited. Rowan showed up exactly on time, looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair was uncombed, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He scanned the room nervously before spotting me in the corner. Redden. He slid into the chair across from me without ordering a drink. Carrick, you look terrible. Cut the crap. We both know why I'm here. I took a sip of my beer. Actually, I don't. You're the one who wanted this meeting. Rowan leaned forward, lowering his voice. I know you've been targeting my business. The inspection, the complaints to the state, probably the vandalism too. That's a serious accusation. You have any proof? I don't need proof. I know. Knowing and proving are two different things. I set down my beer and looked directly at him. But let's say, hypothetically, that someone was targeting your business. Any idea why they might do that? Rowan's jaw tightened. This is about Jovie. Is it? What does my wife have to do with your business problems? Don't play games with me. I'm not playing games. I'm asking a simple question. What does my wife have to do with your business problems? I paused. Unless there's something you want to tell me about my wife. For a moment, I thought he might confess everything. His mouth opened, then closed again. He was sweating despite the cool temperature in the bar. Look, he said finally, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Maybe we can work something out. Work something out? I'm not sure what you mean. The state fines, the complaints, maybe there's a way to make them go away. I laughed. You think I have that kind of influence? I'm just a building inspector. You know people. You could make some calls. Even if I could, why would I want to help you? Rowan was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up, his expression was desperate. Because if you don't, I'm going to tell everyone in this town that you've been harassing me, that you've been abusing your position to settle personal scores. Personal scores? What personal scores would those be? You know damn well. No, I don't. Why don't you explain it to me? I kept my voice calm, reasonable. What personal issue could I possibly have with you? Rowan realized he was trapped. To threaten me, he'd have to admit why I might want to target him, and that would mean confessing his affair with Jovie. This isn't over, he said, standing up abruptly. Sit down, Rowan. Something in my tone made him freeze. I hadn't raised my voice, but there was an edge to it that cut through the ambient noise of the bar. Sit down, I repeated. We're not finished talking. He sat. Here's what's going to happen, I said, leaning forward. You're going to pay those state fines. You're going to fix the violations at your shop. You're going to stop ripping off your customers. And you're going to stay away from my wife. I don't know what you think. I think you've been having an affair with Jovie for months. I think she's pregnant with your baby. And I think you two have been planning to make me raise your child as my own. I pulled out my phone and showed him the screenshots of their text messages. Am I wrong about any of that? Rowan's face went white. How did you? It doesn't matter how. What matters is what happens next. What do you want? I want you to end it. I want you to tell Jovie it's over, and I want you to stay out of my life. And if I don't? I smiled. Then your life is going to get much more complicated than it already is. The state investigation is just getting started. The Better Business Bureau is opening a formal inquiry, and I'm sure the IRS would be very interested in your tax situation. You can't prove I owe back taxes. I don't have to prove it. I just have to report my suspicions to the right people and let them investigate. I finished my beer. You know what the IRS does to people who try to hide income? They don't just fine you, they take everything. Rowan was shaking now. This is extortion. No, this is a friendly conversation between two men who understand each other. I stood up. You have 24 hours to end things with my wife. After that, I stop being friendly. I left him sitting there and walked out of the bar. As I drove home, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. Rowan was cornered now, and cornered animals do unpredictable things. The next 24 hours were going to be very interesting. Jovie was in the living room when I got home, curled up on the couch with a book. She looked up when I walked in, and I could see the tension in her face. How was your evening? She asked. Productive. Had a beer at the Blue Hour, ran into an old acquaintance. Anyone I know? I doubt it. Just a guy having some business troubles. Jovie's phone buzzed on the coffee table. She glanced at it, then at me, but didn't pick it up. Aren't you going to answer that? It's probably just work. I'll check it later. The phone buzzed again, and again. Jovie was trying to ignore it, but I could see the strain on her face. Sounds urgent, I said. Maybe you should take it. It's fine. I'm going to take a shower. Feel free to answer your phone while I'm upstairs. I went to our bedroom and turned on the shower, but I didn't get in. Instead, I crept to the top of the stairs and listened. Within 30 seconds, I heard Jovie's voice, low and urgent. What do you mean he knows? How could he know? A pause. No. You can't come here. He just got home. Another pause. Longer this time. I don't care what he threatened. We stick to the plan. I heard her moving around downstairs, probably pacing while she talked. Because if we panic now, we lose everything. Just calm down and let me think. The conversation went on for another 10 minutes, but I'd heard enough. Rowan had told her about our meeting, and they were trying to figure out their next move. But they were scared, and scared people make mistakes. I actually took a shower then, and when I came back downstairs, Jovie was back on the couch with her book. But her hands were shaking, and she'd read the same page 3 times. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine, just tired." "Maybe you should get some rest. Growing a baby is hard work." She flinched at the word baby, and I knew my message had been received. The next morning I was at my desk reviewing inspection reports when my phone rang. It was Cleo. "Mason, you need to get over to the hospital, now." "What's wrong?" "It's Jovie. She's in the emergency room." My stomach dropped. "What happened?" "I don't know all the details, but you need to get here." I drove to Millbrook General with my mind racing. Had Jovie hurt herself? Had something happened to the baby? Or was this some kind of elaborate setup? Cleo met me in the emergency room waiting area. Her face was grim. "She came in about an hour ago," she said, claiming she fell down the stairs at home. "Fell down the stairs? Mason, she's telling people you pushed her." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "She's saying you've been emotionally abusive, and that this morning you got physical. She's talking about filing charges." I sat down heavily in one of the plastic chairs. "Cleo, I never touched her. I was at work when this supposedly happened." "I know, and I told the doctor that. But she's got some bruises on her arms and a bump on her head." "Bruises she could have given herself." "Probably. But it's going to be her word against yours." I thought about the conversation I'd overheard the night before. Jovie had said they needed to stick to the plan. This was their plan, to frame me for domestic violence and make me look like the villain. "Where is she now?" "Room 3. The doctor's examining her." Cleo hesitated. "Mason, there's something else." "What?" "She's requesting a restraining order. She's saying she's afraid you might hurt the baby." I closed my eyes and tried to think. Jovie was trying to turn the tables on me, to make herself the victim and me the aggressor. It was actually a smart move. If I was facing domestic violence charges, any evidence I'd gathered about her affair would look like the desperate lies of an abusive husband. "I need to call a lawyer," I said. "Good idea. But first, you need to establish your alibi for this morning. Where were you when this supposedly happened?" "At the office. I've been there since 8 o'clock. I pulled out my phone. "I can prove it. I used my key card to get into the building, and I've been on my computer all morning." "That's good. That's very good." 20 minutes later, a police officer approached me in the waiting room. He was young, probably new to the force, and he looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Redden, I need to ask you some questions about an incident this morning." "Of course. But first, I want to show you something." I pulled out my phone and showed him my location history, which clearly showed I'd been at City Hall since 8 a.m. I also showed him the timestamps on emails I'd sent that morning. "Your wife claims you pushed her down the stairs around 9:30, the officer said. "As you can see, I was at work at 9:30. I can give you the names of several people who saw me there." The officer made notes, but he still looked skeptical. "She has some injuries consistent with a fall." "I'm sure she does. The question is whether I caused them." After another hour of questions and paperwork, the officer left without arresting me. My alibi was solid, and without any witnesses or physical evidence, Jovie's accusations weren't enough for charges. But the damage was done. Word would spread quickly in a town like Millbrook. People would hear that Jovie Redden had accused her husband of domestic violence, and some of them would believe it regardless of the evidence. Cleo walked me to my car. "What are you going to do now?" "I'm going to finish what I started." "Mason!" "No, Cleo. They want to play dirty? Fine, but they picked the wrong guy to mess with." As I drove back to work, I thought about Jovie lying in that hospital bed, spinning her story about abusive husbands and falling downstairs. She thought she was clever, turning the tables on me. She had no idea what was coming next. The call came 3 days later while I was eating breakfast. Sheriff Eddie Voss, who'd been a friend since high school, sounded tired on the other end of the line. "Mason, I need you to come down to the station. We need to talk." "About Jovie's accusations?" "About a lot of things. Can you be here in an hour?" "I'll be there in 30 minutes. The Millbrook Sheriff's Department occupied a small brick building next to the courthouse. Eddie's office was cramped and cluttered, with case files stacked on every surface and a coffee maker that looked older than I was. "Sit down, Mason." Eddie closed the door and settled behind his desk. "We've got a problem." "Let me guess. My wife is still claiming I pushed her down the stairs." "That's part of it, but there's more." Eddie opened a file folder. "Rowan Carrick filed a complaint yesterday. He's claiming you've been harassing him, abusing your position as a building inspector to target his business." I kept my expression neutral. "That's interesting. What kind of harassment?" "Unnecessary inspections, filing false complaints with state agencies, possibly vandalizing his car." Eddie looked up from the file. "He's also claiming you threatened him at the Blue Hour 3 nights ago." "I had a conversation with him. I wouldn't call it a threat." "What would you call it?" "A clarification of expectations." Eddie leaned back in his chair. "Mason, we've been friends for 20 years. I know you're not the kind of guy who beats his wife or vandalizes cars, but I also know you're smart enough to cause problems for someone without leaving fingerprints. Are you asking me if I've been targeting Rowan Carrick?" "I'm asking you to tell me what's really going on here." I considered my options. Eddie was a good cop and a better friend. He deserved the truth, or at least part of it. "Rowan's been having an affair with my wife. She's pregnant with his baby, and they were planning to make me raise it as my own." I pulled out my phone and showed him the screenshots. "I found these text messages 3 weeks ago." Eddie read through the messages, his expression growing darker. "Jesus, Mason, why didn't you come to me with this?" "Because it's not illegal to cheat on your husband, and because I wanted to handle it myself." "By destroying his business?" "By making sure there were consequences for their actions." "And the vandalism?" "I had nothing to do with that, but I can't say I was sorry to hear about it." Eddie closed the file and looked at me seriously. "Here's the situation. Jovie's story about domestic violence doesn't hold water. Your alibi is solid, and the hospital staff noticed some inconsistencies in her account. But Carrick's harassment complaint is more credible. Even though he's been sleeping with my wife? That doesn't give you the right to abuse your position as a city employee? I haven't abused anything. Every inspection I've done has been legitimate. Every complaint I've filed has been based on actual violations." "Maybe, but the timing looks suspicious." I leaned forward. "Eddie, what would you do if you found out your wife was carrying another man's baby and planning to trick you into raising it?" "I'd get a lawyer and file for divorce. And in the meantime, while she's living in your house, spending your money, lying to your face every day?" Eddie was quiet for a long moment. "I might want some payback too." "Then you understand my position." "I understand it, but I can't ignore it." Eddie reopened the file. "I'm going to recommend that the district attorney not pursue charges against you for the harassment complaint. There's not enough evidence, and Carrick's credibility is compromised by his relationship with your wife. And Jovie's domestic violence allegations? Those are going nowhere. Too many holes in her story." I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. "So what happens now? Now you go home and try to salvage what's left of your marriage, or you file for divorce and move on with your life." Eddie stood up. "But Mason, no more games. Whatever you've been doing to Carrick, it stops now." "Understood." As I left the sheriff's office, I thought about Eddie's advice. Maybe it was time to stop playing games and force a final confrontation. Jovie and Rowan had tried to frame me for domestic violence and harassment, and both attempts had failed. They were desperate now, which meant they were vulnerable. I drove to City Hall and submitted my resignation as building inspector, effective immediately. If I was going to finish this, I needed to do it as a private citizen, not as a city employee. Then I went home to wait. Jovie returned from the hospital that afternoon with a bandage on her forehead and a story about how the doctor had recommended she stay with her mother for a few days, for her safety. That's probably a good idea, I said. Give us both some time to think. She seemed surprised by my calm response. You're not going to try to stop me. Why would I? If you don't feel safe here, you should go somewhere you do feel safe. Okay, I'll pack some things. While Jovie was upstairs throwing clothes into a suitcase, I made a phone call to the attorney I'd consulted weeks earlier. I want to file for divorce, I told him, and I want to request an emergency paternity test. On what grounds? Adultery. I have evidence. What kind of evidence? I told him about the text messages, the photos of Jovie's car at Rowan's shop, and the timeline that proved the baby couldn't be mine. That should be sufficient. I can have papers drawn up by tomorrow. Do it. When Jovie came back downstairs with her suitcase, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a legal pad. What are you writing? She asked. Just making some notes. About our marriage, our finances, our future. Mason, maybe we should talk about what happened yesterday. You mean when you faked falling down the stairs and tried to have me arrested for domestic violence? Jovie's face went pale. I didn't fake anything. I was scared, and I fell. You were at home at 9:30 in the morning when you supposedly fell, but your car wasn't in the driveway when Mrs. Patterson took her dog for a walk at 9:15. I looked up from my legal pad. Where were you, Jovie? I went out early to get coffee. From where? The only coffee shop that opens before 9 is downtown, and that's a 20-minute drive. You would have had to leave the house before 8:30. I don't remember exactly. You don't remember because you're lying, just like you've been lying about everything else. Jovie set down her suitcase and sat across from me at the table. Mason, I know things have been difficult between us lately. Difficult? Is that what you call carrying another man's baby? The words hung in the air between us. Jovie's face cycled through several expressions: surprise, fear, anger, and finally resignation. How long have you known? She asked quietly. 3 weeks, since I found the text messages on your phone. What text messages? I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots. These text messages. The ones where you and Rowan discuss how pathetic I am for thinking the baby is mine. Jovie stared at the screen, and I watched her realize that her carefully constructed plan was crumbling around her. It's not what you think, she said finally. Really? Then explain it to me. Rowan and it just happened. We didn't plan it. You didn't plan the affair? Or you didn't plan to make me raise his baby? The baby. We weren't sure what to do about the baby. So you decided to trick me into thinking it was mine. We thought it would be easier for everyone. Easier for everyone except me. Jovie started crying then, the same tears she'd used to manipulate me for years, but they didn't work anymore. Mason, please, we can work this out. I'll end things with Rowan, and we can raise the baby together. You've always wanted children. I've always wanted my own children, not some other man's leftovers. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Don't say that. Why not? It's the truth. I closed my legal pad and stood up. You should go to your mother's house, Jovie. Tomorrow morning, you're going to be served with divorce papers. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Mason, I'm pregnant. You can't just throw me out. I'm not throwing you out. I'm divorcing you. There's a difference. Jovie grabbed her suitcase and headed for the door, then turned back. You'll regret this. When you're sitting alone in this house with no family and no future, you'll regret letting pride destroy your marriage. Maybe, but I'll regret staying married to you more. After she left, I sat in the quiet kitchen and thought about the conversation. It was the first honest discussion Jovie and I had had in months, maybe years, and it had confirmed what I'd known since the day I found those text messages. My marriage was over, and it had been over long before I discovered the affair. The next morning, I was drinking coffee and reading the newspaper when there was a knock at the door. It was the process server delivering divorce papers to an empty house. "She doesn't live here anymore," I told him. "Do you know where I can find her?" I gave him the address of Jovie's mother's house and watched him drive away. Then I called my attorney. "The papers have been served. What happens next?" "She has 30 days to respond. In the meantime, we can request the paternity test and start dividing assets." "What about spousal support?" "Given the circumstances, I don't think she'll be entitled to much. Adultery is still grounds for limiting alimony in Maine." "Good." That afternoon, I drove to the Blue Hour for what I expected would be my last visit for a while. The bar was quieter than usual, and Tommy looked up when I walked in. "Mason, haven't seen you in a few days." "I've been busy, getting divorced." "Sorry to hear that." "Don't be, it's the best decision I've made in years." I ordered a beer and sat at my usual spot at the bar. Within an hour, word had spread through the room that Mason Redden was getting divorced, and several of the regulars came over to offer their sympathy and support. "About time," Frank Morrison said. "That wife of yours always thought she was too good for this town." "Some women just can't be satisfied," agreed Pete Sullivan, who drove for the road crew. "My ex-wife was the same way." Around 7 o'clock, Rowan Carrick walked into the bar. The room went quiet. Everyone knew about the affair by now, and everyone knew about the harassment complaint. Rowan looked around nervously, then walked to the far end of the bar and ordered a whiskey. I finished my beer and walked over to him. "Rowan." "Redden." He didn't look up from his drink. "I hear congratulations are in order. You're going to be a father. Look, if you want to start something..." "I don't want to start anything. I want to finish something." I signaled Tommy for another beer. "Jovie and I are getting divorced. She's all yours." Rowan looked up, surprised. "You're divorcing her?" "Filed the papers yesterday. She'll be free to marry you in about 6 months." "I never said anything about marriage." "No? That's interesting, because she seems to think you two have a future together. We haven't really talked about the long term. You might want to have that conversation soon, because she's going to need someone to support her and the baby." I took a sip of my beer. "Unless you're planning to abandon her like you abandoned your ex-wife." "I didn't abandon anyone." "Really? Because I read your divorce file. Your ex-wife said you left her for another woman. Sounds familiar." Rowan's face was getting red. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about. You're a serial cheater who targets married women because you like the drama and the secrecy, but once the marriage ends and the woman becomes available, you lose interest." "That's not true." "We'll see. Give it 6 months." I finished my beer and left him sitting there. As I walked out of the bar, I could feel the eyes of every man in the room on me. Tomorrow, the story would spread through town. Mason Redden had confronted his wife's lover and walked away without throwing a punch. Some people would think I was weak. Others would think I was smart. I knew which group was right. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. Jovie tried to contest the adultery charges, but the text messages and photographs made her case hopeless. She also tried to claim spousal support, but her attorney advised her that the adultery evidence would make that unlikely. The paternity test confirmed what I already knew. The baby wasn't mine. 6 months later, I was sitting in the same kitchen where this whole mess had started, reading the local newspaper over my morning coffee. There was a small item on page 3 that caught my attention. Local woman Jovie Redden gave birth to a daughter last week at Millbrook General Hospital. The father was not listed on the birth certificate. I smiled and turned the page. Frank Morrison had been right about one thing. Karma was a powerful force, and sometimes, if you were patient enough, you could help it along.